Welcome back, everybody. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Abigail Ted, Abby, who has her own channel on YouTube, which is called Naked History. Based on what I know so far about her, about you, Abby, you're a writer, you are a history scholar pursuing a PhD degree in history. You have interest in 18th century literature, maybe even 19th century. I don't know. We clarified that during the conversation. You made a very interesting series of videos about Samuel Richardson's novel, Clarissa, which was very intriguing for me. I'm interested in reading that. I'm not sure if that's related to your research topic, Clarissa.
So it's actually, I've managed to weave it into my research topic because I love it so much. I just had to weave it in there somehow. But it's also my fiction writing. It's more related to my fiction writing than my academic writing.
Cool. All right. Sorry, I interrupted my own introduction with this question.
No, we can start again.
Great. Yeah. You're also branching out to sci-fi at the moment with that recent video about Dune.
Yes, that was crazy. Yeah, that was quite unexpected for me. I tend to get kind of, like 35 to 50 views on a video, be like doing really well. And so I'd gone to go see the film of Dune at my husband's request. And I thought, oh, I'll leave a review because I know nothing about sci-fi. So why don't I give my thoughts on it? I published it at like 11 p.m. at night, and then I woke up the next day and it already had like 200 views or something. And I thought, oh gosh, that's crazy. That never happens to me. And then it just kept on getting like more and more and more. And so I really thought, oh, all these people here like encouraging me to read the book. So I've already started it. And this is like the first sci-fi book, other than I guess you could say Frankenstein, that I've ever really read. So it's a completely new venture for me. Yeah, but I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, that's great. So for me, it is significant that you're, on the one hand, you are a writer, and you are also a YouTuber. So you balanced. Not, I don't want to use the word balance because so you do both of these things, writing and YouTubing. And I'm curious about how you think about those two in relation to each other, if you see them as related, because they're two very different media of expression. And what do you see as like advantages and disadvantages of either of them?
So I definitely do see them as related, but I think for me they feel almost like two sides of the same coin, as it were. So my fiction writing, that is my like ultimate comfort zone. Like that's my safe space. That's where I can like go and dip my psyche in ink and just press it against the page, and everybody who is in my novel is completely, their reactions to my creation is completely under my control because they are my creations, my characters, and that world is my own, so it's like my ultimate comfort zone. Whereas YouTube is like the exact opposite of that. So I'm giving my thoughts and my opinions and sharing my personality, and then I'm putting it out there, and you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know who's going to watch it, how they're going to respond, whether that would be positive or negative, and you don't know how that's going to make you feel when you see these things. And definitely like the most recent one, so the Dune video that really suddenly took off out of nowhere that I wasn't expecting, as soon as that hit about 300 views, it was really weird because I had this uncontrollable urge to just delete the video. I just wanted to delete it because it made me so uncomfortable thinking how many people were watching it and seeing the view count clock up, rather than making me feel happy and like, wow, I've got a video that's doing well. It made me feel really uncomfortable and really uneasy. And I really, really wanted to delete it. But I was like, no, there's no point putting yourself out of your comfort zone if you're going to delete any video that, does vaguely well. Otherwise, what's the point of trying? So yeah, for me, those are the two sides. One is a challenge to put myself out there, and the other is my like little world that I can go escape to when everything gets too much.
Sounds like the comfort is partly a result of practice and a lot of time that you spend writing, and it's very difficult to spend equal amount of time with YouTubing in front of the camera if you're not actors or actresses. I totally understand. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. Sorry, I'm just agreeing with you. Go on.
I understand that that urge to delete. And also, I would add to it, I had similar experiences with some of my videos. And it's very interesting that it's hard to anticipate what is viewed a lot. The YouTube algorithm is not very predictable. And I had this reaction, not so much to go and delete something, but I wish I had known. If I had known, I would have done a better job. I would have taken, more care. But it's that's okay. Maybe those things are.
Definitely. It's so funny, isn't it, the way that works? Because that video, I try and kind of commit to doing at least one video a week. That's something that I really try and do. And so it'd been like 8 days by this point, and I thought I really, really need to do a video, but I'd had such a busy week. So I thought, oh, I know, I'll just quickly talk about my feelings about June. So I kind of hashed this video out in 30 minutes or whatever. I did a couple of attempts, but I didn't script it. I didn't whatever, and that ended up doing really well. And then there have been videos that I've spent like maybe 30 plus hours researching, script writing, editing, pulling them all together, and then they just kind of like fall into oblivion and nobody notices them. And I definitely think I underestimated when I got into YouTube just how that can affect your mindset, that sometimes the amount of effort doesn't necessarily correlate with the result. And that was quite a difficult thing sometimes.
It's I think the effort, I mean, this is a whole different topic. We can maybe spend a whole conversation dissecting, analyzing this. But that I felt like in that discovery I had in my own YouTube journey is like, the more I put effort into creating something, the more I kind of cut off the process and I just presented the outcome of the work. And I kind of, my hypothesis is that that makes it less appealing. Whereas like your style is, it's so great. You're kind of like leaning back on the couch and you just midway in like a stream of consciousness speech. That's so great and engaging.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, it's good. It's good to hear that, because you kind of never know, I think, how your own content. So you can watch it back yourself, but I think either if you're like me, you're probably inclined to be quite highly critical, and then if you're maybe other people, then you don't see the faults in what you said. So yeah, it's always good to get an objective opinion.
Of course, because so about the title of your channel, I wanted to ask, Naked History. Does it suggest, is it based on a general approach, maybe a philosophical approach about history in general? Like there are layers that we have to remove to get to the bottom, to the fact of history. Is it based on that kind of approach to history?
So I really, really wish that I could say that it was as deep and as meaningful as that, because you make that sound quite poetic and philosophical. Unfortunately, I will say, I will admit, it was 100% a marketing decision. So I wanted a name that I thought would tell people kind of what's on the channel. So Naked History, I was hoping would make people think, okay, so it's going to be getting into maybe more interesting parts of history. A name that would be memorable, so people are going to remember who I am, and also something that might intrigue people enough to kind of click on it if they wouldn't otherwise have come across my stuff. So that was 100% the reason, was just shameless marketing was the reason behind that name.
That's okay. That's okay. It might turn into something else. I mean, just like what we talked about with YouTube, how things start don't always correspond to how things evolve into. So it might turn into a more serious, we might have in a few months a debate about the nature of history, whether it is, when we come up with a historical conclusion, is it another veil or is it an unveiling?
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah. Giving me ideas.
I'm curious when and how your interest in reading historic works began. How was your, and what was your relationship with reading prior to that? So your general interest in reading, and then how from that your interest in historic works arose.
Interestingly, they emerged almost entirely separately until I was probably about like 7 or 8 years old. So I've always been kind of strangely obsessed with history. My mum always used to say that I like to eat, breathe, and sleep history, quite literally, because the way that I would explore history as a young child would be trying to do living history. So I would make my parents help me ration food out, like wartime rationing, and I would want to watch the TV in black and white so that I could see it like that. And sometimes I would sleep on the floor because I'd read about slum children, so I wanted to see what that was like. And so I was really, really obsessed with learning about history through experience. And still to this day, like lived experience in history is the part of it that's most motivating to me. But it was only when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I think I read Alice in Wonderland for the first time, and these two things collided because I've always been interested in reading, and my mum's a really keen reader and my dad would read to me every night, so I always liked books, but I never combined a love of history and a love of books until probably about 7 or 8 years old when I read Alice in Wonderland, and I really fell in love with the language. And all of a sudden I realized that this was like a piece of living history itself, because the language and the social attitudes and everything was from a different time, and by reading it I was closer to that time period. And so for me, that was a moment when I really twigged that through historic works of fiction or diary entries or letters, you can get closer to people's lived experiences in history. And so that's how I kind of began combining the two, and it kind of snowballed from there to this point now where I'm like slightly strangely obsessed with reading all sorts of quirky historical texts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is there a particular period? That was my question while introducing you. Do you have a particular period in history that you're mostly focused on, or?
Yeah, definitely the long 18th century for me is the bit that I'm most interested in. It also happens to be the time period that my PhD centers on, so that all kind of ties in nicely. When I was younger, I was definitely more interested in Victorian history or early 20th century history, and particularly the two great wars. I was very, very interested in that and like the experiences of children going through that. But as I got older, then kind of anything from about 1680 until about 1830 is my real sweet spot of things that I like. Yeah.
I really like how you described your embodied relationship with history growing up, how you wanted to experience a historical fact by living it, by seeing how it is from within, from inside, from a first person standpoint. And that connects very nicely to what you said about historic works as artifacts that kind of complement historical accounts. We can have a historical report, and then we can have an object that in a way enacts that moment in history. It's a kind of or tells about somebody's creative activity from that time, which is a different way into it.
Yeah, it's definitely it's something that now, like, I read these books as a reader because I do enjoy them, but also part of me, like, I take so many notes when I read books. I'm constantly highlighting things, and if there's a particular like archaic spelling, or there's just like even the use of punctuation and how that differs, and then the social attitudes that are coming through and the use of language and how words have changed their meaning, like I really, really love looking at those things. So when I'm reading these texts, as much as I'm reading them as a reader and to enjoy them, I am still always going through, and I think that's fantastic. I want to know more about what this saying means, and yeah, so I kind of keep my historian hat on, as it were. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I relate to that, but let's not get into the parallels.
I know all of these questions. I feel that we could. Yeah.
You already mentioned Alice in Wonderland. Could you talk about maybe three other books, or including maybe Alice in Wonderland, that have had a formative role in your personal life and in your education interests, formation of your interests?
Yeah, so probably like the first one that really did have a big impact on me would be Alice in Wonderland. And one of my secondary supervisor, he's from Ireland, and he told me about this Irish concept called thin places, which I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's where you go to places and they believe that the boundary between earthly reality and paradise is thinner there than in other places. So they're usually sites of natural beauty or things like that. And you just get this sense that what's dividing you is thinner and you feel closer to something more divine. And so they have that idea. And I sometimes feel that with books and with history or places that you go to, that you feel, yes, time is the only thing that separates you, but in that moment, it doesn't feel that much of a barrier. The barrier of time separating you between you and the person who wrote that book or the other people who would have read it feels a lot thinner. And with Alice in Wonderland, that was the first time that ever happened to me, that I picked up a book and I felt the barrier of time became smaller for me, and I could really feel that happening. And yeah, so that was the first time that ever happened. So Alice in Wonderland has a big place in my heart for that reason. Yeah. And then probably the next big one is actually a collection of letters by Ignatius Sancho, who was a Black British composer actually in the 18th century. And he was like famous for writing really funny, quirky, witty letters. And after he died, his family published a whole collection of them. And that's actually what I wrote my master's thesis on, was his letters, the theological language that he uses in them. And I read that and I got absolutely hooked on him. I just found him so funny. And that has then directly led into my PhD work, because now my PhD is on Black British authors of the long 18th century and the theology in their writing. Wow. And so that moment when I picked up that book, it was kind of serendipitous, because I was looking for something to write my master's thesis on, and I was just going anywhere, reading anything, looking for inspiration. And I read the letters of this guy and I thought, that's it, I have to do something on him. And here I am now doing my PhD. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a big moment for me. And then interestingly, I wonder if a lot of people would say the Harry Potter books have had a really big impact on them. I feel like at the time of life that it had an impact on me was quite different. So I never read them growing up. Never read them as a child or a teenager. And it was actually after I had my son, I developed really bad obsessive compulsive disorder after my son was born. And it was so bad that I didn't even want to leave the house. There were times when I wouldn't even want to leave the sitting room because I was so convinced that something bad was going to happen, So my world became really, really small for about 6 months, and I really didn't go anywhere or see anybody. I would just sit in this dark room with a sleeping baby. And I had the Kindle app on my phone, and I began reading the Harry Potter books. I just thought, I never read them. I never got around to it. Let me just start now while I have a constantly sleeping baby on me. And so I read these books, and it kind of took me to another place, and it gave me an amazing escape at a time when my physical world was so small. It expanded my reality. And for that, they have a really tender place in my heart that I think a lot of people can relate to. But for me, it just happened at a completely different stage in my life than I think for other people. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. It's about the role that a book plays in a moment in our time, in our life, in our life history. I'm really glad how you emphasized where you were in the case of each book, so we could imagine you as a reader, and the meeting you and each book or a series of books. If we had more time, I would have asked you a question about that theological dimension, which is quite interesting. I wonder myself, I wonder sometimes with the role that theological language plays in communication, in the way we express our thoughts, to the extent that is indispensable. There are things that we can say only with that kind of language, because some people might say, there's a very well-known intellectual whose book Outgrowing God, he's one of his most recent books. Somebody like Dawkins might argue that we don't need that language. We can translate. That dimension into some other kind of set of metaphors. But would you have any quick thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the point of me looking at the theology is that I noticed everyone else who talked about it, all of the other academics, were looking at it from a literary point of view or a social point of view, and everyone was kind of ignoring the use of religious language in all of these books is prolific. I mean, it's every other sentence is another really kind of obvious use of religious language. And I thought, why is nobody talking about that? Why is nobody noticing it? And I wanted to pull that out of it, because at this point in time, to many people in Britain, their religion was an extremely important part part of their life, and particularly within the abolition movement, which all of these people were a part of. It was evangelical Christians who were pushing that forward. So to ignore their religion as that, I feel like is ignoring a whole side of these people. And I just thought I want to show all of them. And just because some people are uncomfortable with religion and the use of religious language, and I accept that and I understand that. But that doesn't mean that we have to pretend that these people were something that they weren't, and that they weren't as devout in their religion as they were. And so it's something that was really important to me to pick that out for them and say, hey, they really believed these things, and they really did trust in providence and other such things. So yeah.
And that kind of like a enabling factor or the condition of possibility for some of the other activities that they did or thought about.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, your relationship with writing. What is your general relationship with writing? And now that you are pursuing a PhD, is that a different writing space? You talked about your comfort zone, the place where you go and it's familiar and you know the characters. Is academic writing, have you found it to be different from that? Are there two different streams of writing for you, or is there a connection between them?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. So I think initially I want to say yes, they're two completely different things, but I think inevitably they feed into each other. I've definitely found, so the two books that I've written over the past year, both of those have kind of plot points or character development and loads of different things that have come directly from things that I've picked up during my research, my PhD. So I've been researching stuff and writing about it, and I think, well, that's really interesting. I'm going to go put that into my book. So that's one of the ways that my PhD work feeds into my fiction writing. But then what I've also noticed is that because I write fiction so often, when I come to write academic writing, I find it so hard to shed my writing personality, my quirks, my use of language, my mannerisms, as it were. And that's something that I'm working really closely with my supervisors, who are so lovely and really supportive. And I've said to them both, I really struggle with just writing in this really dry, kind of bland, professional way. And I want to make history something that people actually are enjoying reading. They're not just having to so that they can find a quote for their essay. That's not what I want. And so they're really trying to work with me so that I can create kind of interesting prose, as it were, for my academic writing, but still maintain complete professionalism and have it stand up against other academic works. So yeah, they definitely feed into each other, but I'm trying to not let the creative writing feed too much into the academic stuff, but it's difficult,
Mm-hmm. I've heard from friends who worked with supervisors who wanted to really get that personal voice out of them to make it very formal. And I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I would actually strongly disagree with that. There's a discipline in academic writing. It's very good to learn that discipline. But I think ultimately, yeah, I sympathize with what you said. Eventually, you want to get to a place where there's life in writing. And life comes from the person, from the person's own voice. So
Right.
it is a challenge. It is a challenge to be formal, to be well behaved on the paper, on the page.
Yeah,
Be alive.
yeah. It's difficult. It's almost like, in the editing process, you have to kind of strip out all of the parts of yourself, which I always find so strange, because it's like historians aren't robots who have no opinions. Like, obviously historians have biases, they have opinions, they have reasons why they're writing something. So I do almost feel like to strip away their personality from the writing is almost as if to pretend that they're completely impartial to what they're saying, which isn't true. It's not true. And I would never want people to think that about me, that I'm, everything I say is objective and I have no even secret agenda. Everybody has a reason why they're writing, even if they don't know what it is. But it's just so difficult in academia, because you do, to be taken seriously, you do need to write in a particular way. And I don't want to just kind of shake up how things are done and say, well, how you're doing it is terrible. But I would like to have a little bit of fun, while I'm writing this very long thesis.
Great. Now let's talk a little bit about YouTube. I'm curious if you had like inspiration, some channels that we might both watch. If a particular channel maybe inspired you to start doing your own uploading your own videos? And in general, what kind of videos you're interested in watching, if you do have time to watch YouTube?
Yeah, I do. I actually do watch YouTube. I'm guessing YouTube is counted as a social media, but it's really the only form of social media that I use and engage with. And I like it because it's a lot slower than the others. So people, if they want to make a response video to something, they kind of have to take the time to do that and to think about it, rather than it just being this kind of Twitter pile-on where people can just be cancelled in a second, things like that. I find that behavior on social media quite shocking. It makes me feel quite uncomfortable, the kind of reactionary way that people behave on there, which is why I really like YouTube, because there are so many different varied opinions that people bring to YouTube. And I've got to say, in the vast majority of places that I engage on YouTube, people are respectful of other opinions, and they share their own opinion, and they offer up for people to share a video reaction to that. And I really like that element of YouTube. So I do use YouTube a lot for that reason. And I watch a whole host of stuff. I like people who have a passion for a subject. I like people who are knowledgeable on a subject. And I do also really try and make a conscious effort to watch things that I would say maybe slightly challenge my opinions. So I do watch a lot of channels where people are just sharing opinions on things, current events or kind of social situations. And I try and watch as many different opinions on that as I can, because I find that's really interesting with YouTube, is to be able to encounter so many different types of people,
Is there a channel that is similar to yours, or maybe was it more like a direct inspiration? Maybe it looks very different if we look at it, but for you, it's like, oh yeah, that was like there's continuity between what that person is doing and what I'm, because I have channels like that. I have channels that I used to watch before I started uploading videos, and I thought, yeah, this person makes it seem like it's a very easy thing to do. It's very natural. It can be incorporated in as part of my day too. Like, let's try it.
I definitely, once I began YouTube, then I think when I was watching other people's videos, then I would start to take note of stuff. So I'm thinking, oh, why am I interested here? Why am I still watching 5 minutes in? And I would start thinking things like that to myself. And I would, even to the point where when I was about to click on something on the homepage, I think, oh, what's made me want to click on that? What has made me? So I'm way more conscious of that. And there certainly are channels. I mean, there are all sorts of different channels, but just one, for example, like I watch a really big YouTuber. He's called like Dr. Mike or something. And he does, he's a family medicine doctor, but he does loads of really interesting, informative videos about medicine, which is something I know very little about. But I really love his energy and his passion, his on-screen presence. And that's something that since I've been doing YouTube, I've been kind of taking note of the things that I really like about the way that he presents. But the reason why I actually began this YouTube channel in the first place was because I'd gone to see what other people were saying about Clarissa, the book that was written in 1748. And I thought, come on, somebody else must be reading it. I want to know what other people are thinking while I'm reading it. And there were like 2 or 3 videos on there, and some of them were like, ages old. And there didn't seem to be much of a conversation happening around this book. So I just thought, well, I'm just going to make my own video then on it, because there must be other people who must search for this book. And yeah, I just wanted to share my thoughts on that book. So that's why I started it in the first place. Yeah.
Amazing. That's a really great response to the question I asked. I kind of neglected that the possibility that it could be an absence that inspires us to start something rather than a presence.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had literally no idea of starting a YouTube channel until I was in my kitchen cooking, and I just wanted to watch something while I was cooking. And I thought, oh, I'll search Clarissa, 1748, Samuel Richardson. And there's only like 3 videos that come up. And I was like, well, so I watched those ones and there's nothing else. And I was like, oh, do you know what? I'm going to make a video about that. And it was like an instantaneous decision. And from then I've, kind of kept going with YouTube. I don't know how it happened, really.
And I would encourage everybody who's listening to us to go and watch those videos. I will provide a link to those videos.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
In the description, especially, I mean, to me, just based on listening to you, I felt like Richardson is kind of presenting dualities, like good and bad. These are good people, these are bad people, and then challenging that, challenging that simplistic like duality of paths. like if you go this way, you'll be happy, and providing a richer and a little bit gloomy image of
Yeah,
the
very
life of one particular.
yeah.
And in general, I'm just really fascinated by novels that read like a case study, a history of one person. Um, what
Yeah.
happens in
And
this?
Richardson really, he treats it like, right, you're in school now, so you're going to listen to what I'm telling you about Clarissa Harlowe's life and lessons that you should learn from her. He, even though the whole thing is meant to be conveyed through letters, the version that I read, which I think he published in 1751, which was the third edition of it, he wrote an extra 200 pages in because the initial response from readers wasn't what he wanted it to be. So he went back and wrote an extra 200 pages, including footnotes, to mention to people. In one of the letters, he'll put a footnote and say, like, basically, this is the message that you need to take away from this. He does not let you slip on the moral lesson. So in terms of analysis for exactly what the author intended, he guides you the whole way through. You know exactly what his opinions are, but it's so fascinating from like a social perspective too. And for some reason, even though it's meant to be a really gloomy tragedy, I find some parts of Clarissa quite funny, and I think it is because Richardson was so determined that it would be this horrible moral lecture in which you would see a poor young woman's life being destroyed, but he's so kind of ham-fisted in some moments of that, making sure that you understand that it becomes almost comical. And particularly when you learn that the response of some particularly female readers, that his villain Lovelace, who he wanted you to hate and think was a horrible man, loads of women fancied him and they loved him and they loved the character of Lovelace, and he was appalled by that. He was appalled that women were attracted to the villain of his story, and he kind of inadvertently created what I think is now known as rake literature. So it's literature in which the romantic figure is a bad boy, is somebody who you shouldn't objectively like and yet you find yourself attracted to. So he quite inadvertently created that whole genre of literature. And I find it so fascinating. Yeah, I definitely recommend everybody, if you like kind of 18th or 19th century literature, Clarissa is a great one.
To me, that sounds like he discovered something. He discovered, like, and as you said, inadvertently, he discovered that if you really hold to a position strongly enough, you will find its contradictions, like internal contradictions of, if you really like try to flesh out the tragic situation by describing it faithfully, then you will inevitably find like certain comic aspects of it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure that he would be horrified that I find anything in Clarissa funny, but there's about 300 pages towards the end of the book in which Clarissa keeps on telling everybody that she's dying imminently, and yet she just keeps on remaining alive only to tell people that she's dying, which for some reason I found quite amusing, that she's kind of continually like, gosh, I'm about to die soon, and it's 300 whole pages of just that, which is just like the length of which he went through that doesn't feel like it's a quick and sudden death because it's such a long book. So almost the length of the book as well adds to the humor of it because he drags everything out so painfully. So almost it's like you have to experience your own tragic torture as a reader of Clarissa. He has to put you through that for you to learn your moral lesson. I really, really enjoy it, and I love, as you can tell, speaking about it.
Now, back to YouTube, I wanted to ask you this because you have a very pleasant voice and a style of presentation. And do you have a background? Do you have a background in performing arts? Like, do you have acting background on the stage and performing?
No, I don't. So actually, really interesting that I often get complimented on my voice and my kind of style of talking, and it's quite interesting. So up until 6 years ago, my voice sounded almost completely different, and my style of speaking is very different. So I ended up having this really weird medical condition, which I won't bother boring you with the details of, but it ended up that basically my chest walls and my diaphragm became temporarily paralyzed. Like I couldn't breathe. So then they had to, like in an emergency, put me onto an intubator and ventilator. But the tube that they used to ventilate you in the women's ICU, they had run out of all of the tubes. And of course, it's an emergency. So then they just went next door to the men's ICU and they just got a tube from the men's ICU, was really too wide for my esophagus. Like they could get it in, but it shouldn't have been used on me. And it's essentially just caused like permanent damage to my vocal cords and my larynx, which is so interesting because everybody who I've met has said how much like nicer my voice sounded afterwards. And people have said to me, wow, you have such a lovely voice. And it's so interesting because this thing that should have been like a real like, oh gosh, isn't that tragic, has ended up being like one of my most complimented features. So it's really interesting. And particularly because I need to catch my breath a lot more now as well, because it kind of left me with some slight like lung issues. I find myself having to pause a lot more in conversation, whereas I didn't used to do that before. I kind of used to just talk very loudly at a very fast pace, and I would never really stop. So in a way, having that happen to my voice has had to make me really change the way that I communicate with people, and for the better somehow. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And let me talk about the quality that I'm referring to specifically. It's a quality that it is uncommon because most of us, I believe most people, and I observe people very carefully, we do extra things to our voice that make it less personal, just kind of like the academic style of writing. Most of the time when we speak, it's kind of like maybe can be a quality of self-consciousness, being self-conscious, being a little bit uptight, wanting to project a kind of persona to the other person, living up to some kind of image. And it takes a lot of training. So I've taken acting courses. Some of them are specifically for voice. This was years ago. Probably forgot most of what I learned. But I've discovered that it takes a lot of work to let go of all those unnecessary extra stuff that we do to our voices, to just get in touch with the natural mode of expression. And the first thing, one of the first things that I noticed about your presentation is that you have that, it seems like it is truly yours, the way you speak, your voice. So
oh, that's really interesting to hear you say that, because I've never really thought about it in that way. But yeah, because I became so like limited in the way that I could speak. So really, like how I'm speaking to you now, I can't really project much louder than this. So it becomes a real issue. Like if I go to restaurants or bars or anything, my husband has to order everything for me because I can't speak over the noise, you know. It also made me a much better listener, because I would go out with people, and before, whereas I would just be able to kind of talk over people, I can't do that now. So it's like I literally had that ability taken away from me, and it really, I actually enjoy this mode of being much more, because I can't add inflections into my voice, I can't project, I can't talk over people. And it's kind of forced me, as you said, to just speak in my authentic way. And I have noticed since then, even people who knew nothing about that medical history have really complimented me and said, oh, I really love your voice. So it's really interesting that something that I kind of thought was, you know, had been maimed, actually it's kind of become a blessing in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully you'll continue to be surrounded by people who appreciate that and understand it, because it's classes, are, you know, qualities. Sometimes we have to explain them to people who are not necessarily sympathetic. So it's good that your friends appreciate it.
Yeah, very supportive friends in that way.
Now, you mentioned in one of your recent videos that you finished your second novel recently. So I had to ask, when will it be published? Do you have an estimated date? And related to that, related to that, I also want to
No, I'm jumping at the bit here.
Why your first novel, you decided not to publish it, or it will be published later on, you need to revise it? So
yeah. So in answer to the first question, I really hope to start the process of publishing the second novel soon. Actually, today I'm just waiting to hear back from, I sent it to a developmental editor who I get to kind of look at my work, and he is very lovely but very honest. So like if he doesn't like the way that the narrative pans out, like he's just going to tell me. So I'm waiting to hear back from him today, and then I'm hoping next year I've just decided that I'm going to self-publish. I did try querying my first novel, and then I just came to a point of realization. It's like I had this collision with clarity where I realized that the only reason I was really chasing traditional publishing was for approval. I was chasing that so that I could have somebody, an agent and a publisher, say to me, yes, you pass, you're good enough. You're a good enough writer to be published. And I thought that's not a good enough reason to chase traditional publishing, not to disparage it, because it's obviously has worked for hundreds of years. But for me right now, what I really want is to just put my work out there to people. I am thinking of recording some like audio clips of chapters of my book once I've polished it and I'm happy with it, and putting those on my YouTube channel, really because I'm happy to just put it out there and share it with people. It's not a kind of a business for me. I just want to share my work. So my second novel, hopefully I'm going to start sharing audio clips of that on my YouTube very soon, and sometime in 2020 I hope to have it published and available for people to read in book form as well. And the first book, I don't know if I'll ever get around to publishing that one. I both love it and I hate it. It's the first novel that I finished, but you know, before I wrote that full novel, I think when I finished it was like 115,000 words, but I've cut it back down to about 90,000 words now. I'd written 75,000 words of that novel a first time, and I was so frustrated with myself and I hated it so much. I literally deleted the entire thing and erased every trace of it. So every email that I'd sent myself, anything that had it on, I deleted. And I was just like, it's not going where I want it to. And I started again. And it was this really crazy thing. And I keep on getting to that point again with it now, where every time I write it, it feels like right by numbers. It feels staged. It feels forced every time I read it. It just doesn't feel natural. Whereas my second book, I read it and it feels much more natural to me.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's I assume it takes a lot of self-control and discipline to withhold publication. Is that right? Or do you feel like it would take more effort to proceed and even because I've heard, yeah, people publish bad works too. They just say, okay, I finished it, so I
have it.
Yeah.
I would say I'm more like 90% of the time I just have major imposter syndrome, and I think, why did I ever think that I could write a book that anybody would want to read? When people say good things about it, when I send it to other writers to read it, I just kind of inherently don't believe them. I'm like, oh, it's because we're friends, that's why they're saying something nice about it. And so part of me really is like, oh, I kind of don't want to publish it, because I either expect that nobody will read it, or that the people who do read it just really won't understand it and they'll just think that it's rubbish, you know, they just really won't like it. And then 10% of the time I get this really weird, like completely opposite feeling where I'm like, no, actually maybe it's really good, and I just want to put it out there and I want people to see it, and I want people to read my work, and I want them to experience my characters and my world. And when I have moments like that, I almost just like instantly want to share it with people, you know, but those are very few and far between when I feel that way. So I think for me it's more going to be a case of having to like put it out into the world, and just whatever happens, you know.
Excuse me. I've heard some authors even talk about forgetting their earlier works. Like after they send it to the publisher, they just forget it, and I don't even care. Like that's a little bit too much for me. I find it difficult to understand, but maybe it's a coping mechanism with our past actions.
I feel like because the first novel that I wrote, more people have seen it. So I'd sent it to agents, had a load of friends and other writers and kind of strangers who very kindly offered to read it for me. And loads of people had seen it. In fact, my English teacher who taught me at A-level, which is when you're like 16 to 18 here, he read it for me. And because so many people had seen it, and loads of the feedback was really, really good, including from my English teacher, who I knew would give me his true opinion on it. But there was also lots of different critiques and lots of people saying, oh, I would change this about it. I don't really like that about it. And because everyone was saying different things, then I kind of got to a point where I was like, so everybody's going to hate something about it. And it kind of made me hate everything about it, if you see what I mean. So almost with the second book, I don't want to expose it to too many people before I publish it, because I have a lot of self-doubt anyway. So if people say, I'd cut that out, then that will always be in my head nagging me like, oh, that's a bad bit of the book, you know.
Yeah. Well, Well, we are at the very close to the hour mark, so I wanted to thank you again for joining me. I'm so happy that you are, first of all, on YouTube, that I found
Thank
you,
you.
and I wish you the best of luck with your creative writing, with your research, with your PhD work, and I hope to see
Thank you.
and read more of your work. Thanks a lot,
Oh,
Abby.
thank you so much. And thank you for having me on. It's been a
Pleasure.
pleasure, and it's so nice to chat about all these different things. So thank you so much.
Pleasure is mine.